For me, secularism is very important because I live in a country with a majority of the people are Muslim, and Islam is always political. Islam has been political since Muhammad was since him, because you can have the political power. The issue after the Prophet was who is going to take the power, but the political power, not the religious power. And then you have division between Shiites and other people. It's all political. North Africa and all the states in the Middle East, with the majority of Muslim people, Islam is a religion of the state. And when Islam is a religion of the state, the law and the family law concerning women is about Sharia. What is Sharia? Sharia is a way of doing things. But you have as many Sharias that you have Muslim states. If you can say about Muslim states, if you can speak about Muslim state. We inherit, but not in Senegal, and I'm going then to Senegal. In Senegal, for instance, we had, before colonization, the pre-colonial was, could you say, secular, because there is separation between religion and the political leadership. And even we have been Muslim since the 11th century, is as far as this. Except in the northern part, we have a theocracy. In northern Fouta, in the Fouta Toro, we had a theocracy. And in the 16th century, only once, it took maybe 100 years, and that's it. We came back to political power of Islam when with colonization, the French brought the administration, the colonial administration, and the church. Then people said, "Oh, we have to do something." So they hang up to Islam because it was politically organized. Secularism is very, very, very important. And we know it now more and more because secularism is at risk in Senegal. It is at risk because of the propagation, not of Islam, of the Islamic discourse. Since from Khomeini to the petrodollars and I don't know which one is, maybe the petrodollar were before Khomeini. But anyway, the fact that Muslim leaders in Arab countries are funding the re-Arabization of Islam in all over Africa is something which is very important. And it's a challenge to secularism.
Fatou spoke of Islam being always political. I emphasize a lot the political nature of Christianity revival. What is being, and maybe I didn't say that today, but the forces I'm coping with within Christianity, what is in there in the long-term projection is really the refoundation of a Christian world. Is really the refoundation and re-expansion of Christian civilization. This is how these guys are speaking. We left the UN conferences, particularly after the +5, almost entirely convinced that we had won over the Vatican. We felt victorious over them. And certainly this was a defeat for them. I'm not saying that it was not. And we did not pay attention to what they were cooking up in a long-time perspective. So I myself, who had witnessed that eruption, I was flabbergasted around 2013 and 2014 when I saw the anti-gender full-blown campaigns coming up, because we were thinking, both Europeans and us in Latin America, that what these guys were doing was more of the same. And it was not. It was an entirely new formation that they have been slowly crafting. And I'm saying that because instead of realizing at that point in time that what we had won was just a tiny battle, we move forward, implement, sustain, and do other things without paying attention to what the adversary was doing and projecting. So I think this is really very critical. And now we are trying to catch up, really. Now we are running after them. They are ahead of us, very clearly, and it should be said.
Yes, I was saying to Sonia, her talk about the anti-gender politics reminds me of why it's so important for people from my region to be involved in these things, to recognize that this is something global. To agree with Anasuya on this, this is going on everywhere. So, but if you don't know, if you can't give it a name, if you can't see it in relation to other things that are happening, if you take it out of context, that context, you don't really understand how to deal with it. So I happen to think that the whole question of religion, how religion is used, is a very important part of this neoliberal analysis. I've always believed that to the extent that neoliberalism undermines states and destroys economies and creates inequality, it also creates the anxieties that make people turn to want some kind of authoritarianism, whether it's an authoritarian type of government or whether it is authoritarianism in religion. And so as we talk about religion as a political tool, we should link it with the neoliberalism. You can't separate that religious bit, that cultural bit, from the economics that are creating some of the pressures and the anxieties that are fueling that return to religion.
We see a direct link almost with the spread of neoliberalism and the spread of evangelical practices across the continent. But what I find fascinating is there is this breakfast group or something in the US. You know, every president in the US has to go pray with these people, and they actually what is it called?
The prayer breakfast.
Okay, the prayer breakfast. Those are the ones that are actually funding the law against LGBTQ in Uganda, death sentence. And what's funny is that, I mean, it's not funny, but they push this law, and another group like the State Department would come and say, no, this is not, proper. So you really have to recede. So the law has been floating, sort of. They haven't started practicing it, but actually the parliament has passed it. So this link between the transnational reactionary movements in the US and in Africa are becoming much more evident. And it also, in the case of Uganda, but it's not only Uganda, and so you see this link between what's happening in other places and how through a lot of finance they are trying to shape religious and other practices on the continent. So I'm very glad to hear that all this is taking place in other places, and for us to think through how do we, as you said, what do we learn from their organizing, or not learn, and be aware, though, that it's not a Ugandan thing or a Ghana thing, that there is a real international link that's going on that's really trying to destabilize and to take us back to the kitchen, as it were, and to death sentences in other places. So until Sonia's prisons are eliminated, we're going to face a lot of death sentences around issues that has no business being litigated. Thanks.
I don't even know the language to use to talk about how Islam is demonized in that context of violent radicalization and violent extremism. But then we don't talk about, at least in our context, the radicalization of Buddhism and how violent Buddhism is and always has been in terms of its political agenda, right? if you look in Asia, some of the most violent wars have been fought from countries that come from a Buddhist ethos, starting from Japan and the Second World War and Japan's role in Asia, to Cambodia, one of the most violent, genocides that happened under Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, and Myanmar now currently, how Buddhism is leveraged politically in a very violent expression. And Buddhism is seen to be this benign thing, and it isn't. It's as bad as the Christian wars of, the Inquisition and the Crusades. That was the word I was trying to look for. And how political society is using that violence, and how intermixed that is in terms of, how we are governed. And how that has become an ideological underpinning. Now, for us, in our constitution, Buddhism is given the foremost place. And today, you're a traitor if you don't protect Buddhism, if you don't agree to anything that Buddhism, particularly the Buddhist hierarchy, the Buddhist church, if you will. You have to listen to that hierarchy. If the Buddhist monks say, and the Buddhist hierarchy says, you do this, you do this. You don't do anything outside of their sanction. So it's in a way like the Catholic Church, like the Vatican. So we also have a high priesthood that determines exactly what's said and done. And all the othering that happens via the Buddhist establishment. And I think this is the sort of violence of religion and its expression and how it's used, I think, is another thing that we probably need to address. I don't have the framings, the language, the anything. I'm just putting it down as something that I want to bring to the table.